Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out to this very, very important meeting. For those of you watching at home, whether it be on YouTube, North Penn Television, or listening on the radio, I encourage you please to watch the work session from February, where we discussed, March. No, February. It's March now. Where we discussed the potential to adding to the ninth grade to the high school campus, the renovations at North Penn High School, and the rationale behind some of the decisions that are going to be presented this evening. I also want to point out that on April 13th, that will be a community forum where folks can come out and engage in a dialogue. We can, for those who have attended forums in the past, we'll have a microphone in the audience, walk around, answer questions. You can direct questions to us about this agenda item. Really looking forward to that opportunity to engage. Tonight's purpose of this meeting, in which no action will be taken, and this is an informational item, is simply for the administration to outline for the board and for the community kind of the intentions here at North Penn High School and our renovation and some of the options that will be voted upon in the future. So again, there will be no action taken this evening. I do want to emphasize that tonight's presentation is long. There are 75 slides. There's a lot of information that will be presented in terms of options, design, cost, financing, and then potentially a special presentation from Mr. Scrocky. So with that, I'm hopeful that we will address most of your questions through the entirety of the presentation. I'm just asking the board to please hold on to your questions till the end, because with these 75 slides, I'm hopeful we will touch on most of those items. So with that, we have quite a team presenting this evening. It's not just the administration, but it's also representatives from Schrader Group Architects and also from PFM, our financial advisors. So first up, anyone presenting from the administration will be presenting from here, and then any of the folks that we are working with, engaged with in this process, will be presenting from the podium. So first, I'd like to pass the microphone to Mr. Pete Nicholson, former North Penn High School principal, and now his title is Administrator of Secondary Education and Renovation. Mr. Nicholson.
All right, thank you, Dr.
I'm sorry, just before you start, I just wanted to let the public know that Dr. G, Dr. Lewis Campbell, and Ms. Wesley are attending this meeting remotely. Sorry, I forgot to announce that earlier. Thank you.
No problem, Mrs. Stolen. Thank you, Dr. Bauer. Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Pete Nicholson, and happy to be presenting this evening. So just to kick things off, I want to go through the agenda for this evening. First, we will review the February meeting and some of the key points from that work session. We are going to go through an overview of all the options that we consider and that we looked at throughout this master planning process, look at specific options that are being considered for North Penn High School moving forward, and finally, financing considerations. As Dr. Bauer said, it is a long presentation, but we're hoping that it won't take an eternity, and we'll be able to move through this pretty quickly and answer any questions you may have at the end. So with that, if you rewind to February during the work session, here we sit in North Penn High School, a building that was first conceived of in the 60s, built in 1971. Since that time, the senior cafeteria was built in 1998, K-Pod was added in 1999, and finally the Rick Carroll Natatorium was erected in 2005. There have been no full-scale renovations to this part of the building, to the old part of the building, since it was built in 1971. If you look at the capital projects plan, which Mr. Schneider reports on in Facilities and Operations Committee every month, there are over $114 million in needs to North Penn High School that are currently in that capital projects plan. Of those $114 million, $77 million are at a level 3 or higher. And just for the public that don't tune into F&O every month, a level 3, based on the rubric that's used for that plan, means that if a shutdown should happen, we would need to potentially close school for a day, for a couple days, for a week, who knows. But those are level worthy of closing school. So that $77 million worth of fixes, that could potentially close North Penn High School. Additional $20 million is currently at a 2.5 to a 3. So there are some very high value needs of the building, being just over 50 years old. But I will say, no one can say it more eloquently, and no one can explain this more effectively than Mr. Gilmer. So I will ask Mr. Gilmer to replay the video that we launched back in February and let you all see that.
North Penn High School, a concept first presented in the 1950s to the North Penn Valley. After much conversation and debate, as a community, the North Penn residents decided that it could better serve the needs of the students in the towns of Hatfield, Lansdale, North Wales, and the surrounding areas by one high school. In 1955, North Penn High School officially opened its doors with an expanded facility at the Lansdale High School location on Penn Street. However, within just a decade, economic growth and a growing population, this high school on Penn Street no longer had the space or the resources needed for our students to compete in our changing society. The space race was on. Technology, math, science, and a growing local economy combined with another population burst, the North Penn community rallied behind the need for a new, modern facility to meet the demands for students who could excel in this new age of technology and science. As the first men were landing on the moon in July of 1969, ground was broken for the new North Penn High School, all the way out in the farmlands of Towamencin. By 1971, construction was complete on a state-of-the-art facility where students could study, learn, and excel in all areas of our modern economy. This building, North Penn High School, continues to serve students from the first graduating class in 1972 to today. While an addition was added in 1999 to accommodate growing enrollment in the 1990s, from a population of 2,400 students to nearly 3,000 students in the high school today, the original structure has not been renovated for over 52 years. This new North Penn High School in Towamencin has served this community well for over 50 years. Like many of us, its age is showing, and it's just not the 70s-inspired paint palette. It is the critical components that people do not see in the walls, ceilings, and mechanical closets. The HVAC system utilizes the same pneumatic technology from the 1960 Apollo era. Valves and plumbing have continued to corrode and expresses itself frequently with burst pipes that create significant damage in the building. Electrical components, lighting, structure, windows, and roofing are all in need of help. Our North Penn Facilities Department has tended to this building well over the past 50 years, plugging, patching, and repairing where possible. Even the spaces themselves require an update to bring North Penn High School into the 21st century, meeting the needs of students for the next 50 years. When first opened, North Penn High School included spaces for meeting, collaboration, discussion, and innovation. Those spaces have been gobbled up by the need for additional instructional spaces and programs that were never part of a 1971 curriculum. Nearly 50,000 graduates from North Penn High School have gone into the world well prepared for an ever-changing society. Our staff and community have always been committed to our students to achieve that goal. North Penn is again ready to meet the challenges of a new century, the needs of our diverse student body, and the expectations of a community that is, and always has been, North Penn strong.
Thank you, Mr. Gilmer, and thank you for that explanation through video. So I think that lays a pretty good groundwork as to why we need to have a renovation, not why we would like to conduct a renovation here at the high school, but why we really need to make sure that the building can stay up and running for our students. The next part to just briefly review is the reason why we are looking at the potential of bringing 9th grade to North Penn High School. Currently, as it said, we serve students grades 10 through 12. We are the only high school in Montgomery County, I believe Montgomery and Bucks County, that do not have 9th grade at the high school. The slide that's up there now that you're looking at is data from the recent September 2022 Hanover Strategic Planning Survey, which encompassed about 1,800 respondents from North Penn School District. Of those, 190 reported as being 9th grade students during the 21-22 school year. If you take a look, there were 13% of our 9th graders that participated in coursework at the high school, advanced coursework, during the 2021-2022 school year. For those of you that aren't aware, there are students, in this case about 130, that participate in coursework at the high school that they cannot access at the middle school. Because it's advanced, because it's maybe more of a bit of a niche coursework, they come to the high school to do so. However, to do so, they get on a bus bright and early, sometimes, many times, before 7 o'clock. They get here to the high school, they begin their day at 7:21 with high school students, When their schedule here is done, they get on a bus, they go to the middle school, and they end their day at 3 o'clock when the middle schools end. So their day is longer. They're on a bus at least 3 times, or need to at least be transported 3 times, so they lose out time in the middle of the day. So it takes a commitment to do so. If you look at the survey results, 64% of respondents said they would have participated in higher level coursework if 9th grade were here at the high school. So that's a vast difference in the amount of students that did take part in higher level coursework and those that would if they were here. Similarly, would you use physical resources at the high school? 64% said they would if they were here. And would you enroll in career and technical education courses? 41% said that they would. And again, for 9th graders to participate in North Monco, there's a lot of transportation that goes into that. Although we could walk from here to North Monco in about 5 minutes, if you're coming from the middle school, you're getting on a bus, you're being transported back and forth, and losing time and coursework during the school day. On the right-hand side, extracurricularly, 31% of 9th grade students participated in extracurricular activities, but 77% said they would have participated in extracurricular activities or 76% in athletics or the arts if 9th grade was here at the high school. So we see in all regards, when we take the barrier of transportation, when we take the barrier of time away, and we bring 9th graders to the high school, we create a culture and a climate here at the high school where students will take higher level coursework and they'll be more involved in the school at a younger age. So with that, after recapping February, to go over a view of the options that we considered, I'll kick it back to Dr. Bauer.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. And again, for folks who haven't been in tune to all of our meetings, we also presented over the last couple months an enrollment study and a traffic feasibility study as well, and the implications of bringing 9th graders to the high school. So on this next slide, you'll see, the next 2 slides, quite frankly, you'll see an overview of some of the options that have been considered and discussed and all the decision points that need to be made in order to conduct and complete a master plan here at North Penn. So some of those decision points are whether or not 9th grade will be coming here to this campus, whether or not our transportation center would be relocated. If 9th grade moved to the high school, the next natural question is, would 6th grade move out of the elementary schools? And then depending on what happens at the middle schools, are we renovating all 3 of them? Everyone acknowledges the need to renovate our middle schools. And if we don't move 6th grade out of the elementary school, would we still need all 3 middle schools? So next slide, please. So here's a list of future considerations with the understanding that we do not need to make all these decisions right now. But they are all things that when you're master planning and considering where you're going over the next 10, 20, and we're going to talk about the year 2055 here this evening. Okay, but some of the future considerations that need to be taken into, pardon the redundancy consideration, is the air conditioning at the middle schools, renovating 2 or 3, as I said, transportation, our grade configuration. The ESC is also in dire need of renovation at some point. Some of our elementary schools, you'll see there on the right-hand side, the dates when they were last touched. Bridle Path, for example, people think of that as a new building. That was built in 1994. You have Gwynedd Square, you have Oak Park, Walton Farm. Renos and AC to these buildings happened, but when you have 21, now 22 facilities, there's a cycle to keeping your facilities and protecting your assets. And then, of course, we do have plenty, 52 specifically, modulars across the district. And those modulars are considered temporary construction. We would like to one day be at a point where we don't have any temporary construction. So the next slide is really a very, very important slide to share with the community and the board. And right now we are envisioning 2 options for this high school renovation. Option 1 would be a truly reimagined North Penn High School campus, using this facility that exists, but restructuring the way that we use the facility itself, changing the spaces to better align with 21st century learning. You'll hear more about that later this evening. Flexible spaces for our students and staff, and a potential transition to 2 middle schools instead of 3. The estimated cost for this, and we'll go into great detail about how these estimates were devised and what the impact would be to the average taxpayer. But the cost for option 1 is listed at $400,801,853. Option 2 is listed as a basic renovation of North Penn High School, which would be the systems, the walls, the ceilings, the paint. So essentially, this building as is, but redone. And it would be new, but the same structure itself, and no 9th grade addition. Certainly, we would update the HVAC system, the electrical and plumbing, and all those things. This would not reimagine the space. It would just essentially give the space itself a facelift. The overall cost for that was $236,325,945 total cost, and both of these options include a relocation of our transportation department. I do want to emphasize that in option 2, I recognize that the numbers are dramatically different. Option 1's about $400 million. Option 2 is about $236 million. But please keep in mind, option 1 potentially would require the renovation of 2 middle schools, not 3. Also, please keep in mind that, hold on, it escapes me. The modular construction for option 2. So if there was not an addition to North Penn High School, it would necessitate that we bring modular construction here that we use as a swing space to renovate certain portions of the building, right? So if you were going to close APOD, which is in the back left-hand corner from Skyview to the building, if you were to close APOD and renovate it, you would need a space for those teachers and kids to go. That's where the modular construction would come in. So I believe Mr. Schrader will hit on this later, but the estimated cost for that temporary modular construction could be in excess of $15 million itself. And then at the end of the project, those modulars would hopefully be removed. So I took a lot of time on this slide, but it's an important slide. Option 1 would be reimagined and moving 9th grade. The addition would happen first, and then we would renovate the rest of the building, and then the 9th graders coming to this campus would happen last. Option 2 would be a basic renovation of this building itself and would include modular construction. Okay, so with that, next slide, please. And I kind of outlined these other implications here. Number 1 here, you'll see that it would require a referendum. For some of you, that is a new word, and we will go in great detail as to what a referendum is and why it would be necessary when we talk about the financing. Option 2, again, would require modular construction. All right, so with that, we are now going to hear from our architect, Mr. David Schrader. He has a team of folks with him here this evening. He is no stranger to the district. Happy to have you this evening, Mr. Schrader.
Okay, thank you. So I have with me Danielle Hoffer and Devin Bradbury, folks who you've seen before and are familiar to the district, as Dr. Bauer mentioned. A couple of interesting points here, and we'll get to this slide as we go here, but 2 major points besides those that Dr. Bauer has made so far. 1, we mentioned that Mr. Schneider has put together a capital project list of $114 million. So those are just the items to keep the building functioning. Keep that number in mind because the other 2 numbers sound huge, but those are relative to kind of fixing the car as you go. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're talking about the other options here. The second one is walking in tonight and looking at the cornerstone of the K-Pod, which is 1999. So that's already 24 years old. And that doesn't even speak to the balance of the building. And just think about what you typically hear from many architects, many builders who talk about the lifespan of the systems in their buildings, and those lifespans are 30 years. And that's typically what people look at when they start to think about when they might renovate a building. So I want you to keep those 2 pieces of the information in mind as we kind of go through the balance of this discussion. My job is to quickly talk about to expound upon the options that Dr. Bauer has spoken about, to give you some budgets. And we have to keep in mind that these are budgets, and the budgets are intended to allow you to build some costs around, to talk about financing options and so on. And once we've gone through some of that information, at the very end we'll lay out how a potential schedule could work if you were to proceed with the first option here. So that's what we'll talk about. So if we just go back to that existing site plan real quickly. Yeah. Just to orient you, the main driveway entry is off of, obviously, South Valley Forge Road, and it drives right into that front entry point that you see at Cape Cod today. Interesting point about the site right now is that you are using, at least in the north part of this drawing, the transportation facility. You're using portions of the property for the transportation facility. So that is taking property from the facility currently for parking, for sports, for all those good things that go on with a facility like this. The other point is you have recently acquired the WNPV radio station site. Today, that is property that the district owns, the district has not used. And so the options that we're going to talk about, both option 1 and option 2, speak to the use of those two pieces. You heard Dr. Bauer talk about, or perhaps Mr. Nicholson talk about, the fact that any of these options takes the transportation center off the site and reuses that property for high school purposes. So now we'll move to the option 1. And as you heard, this one is basically talking about rethinking the entire property and thinking about this building, and I'll give you some images, as if it were to step into the next generation of spaces. And so that means not only adding the spaces that you need, but it also means taking the entire interior of the building and really repurposing it. So if we can go to that slide. I want you to keep in mind that the concept that you see in front of you does nothing more than add square footage to the building. There's no design here yet, but what we did do is we spent all of last summer working with all of your departments to do programming for what it would take to make this facility the right facility for the next generation. So we worked through square footages for all of the different programs that they hope to offer over the next 20 years, as much as they could see that far, and to think about the square footage that it would take to do that. So the right-hand side of the plan, as you currently see it, shows a series of clusters of classrooms. That intent really is to try to show the square footage that it would take to accommodate 9th grade on this site. So the true square footage required to do that is somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000 square feet. The portion that you're seeing is probably around 150,000 square feet. The balance of the square footage are shared uses. They're athletic areas, they are food service areas, they're the arts, they're the library, all those good things that go into the use of a student's typical day. So the concept shows a couple of other things, and I'm going to expound upon that in some photography in the next couple of images, but it shows a commons kind of nestled into the center of the site. So you're probably familiar with J-Pod sitting there, that circular area of arts that sits right in the center of the building. What's kind of interesting about the spot in which that sits is it has direct access to the athletics, it has direct access to the performing arts, and as I walked in here this evening and saw all the students sitting in your main entry hall, it becomes a place that's used as a community space in the building all day long. And what we're seeing as trends as we start to go through these processes with buildings like this, they kind of come from the higher ed area where people are using these spaces not just for dining, not just for studying, but they're using them all day long and all evening long, and they become the central space for the building that people use throughout the day. So that's the intent of the space that you're seeing there. If it gets designed there in the end, great. If it doesn't, we'll find something else that works through the process here. The other piece that you see here is an expansion of the PE and athletics areas on the left-hand side, and that's only because there are some spaces that are currently in the existing athletic areas that could be repurposed, particularly if you tried to put a commons in there. So what this does is it makes great use of a completely refurbished auditorium that we're in, all of the performing arts support spaces that go around that. There would be new arts programs that are built around all of those spaces. And then the classroom clusters in the upper right-hand corner all get refurbished and probably have quite a bit of renovation done within them to make them all the next generation learning spaces. So something that's in common between this option 1 and option 2 that you'll see, the radio station site is an opportunity for you to build in additional athletic fields. And we've gone back and forth about whether it's athletic fields or whether it's parking. That would all become part of your planning process. But you can see already that there are 2 full athletic fields of space there, and possibly more if you decided to do something else with trees and so on. Where the bus and transportation center used to be is an opportunity to greatly expand the parking and pull it all over towards your athletic areas, and then also offer some new athletic fields up against the North Monaco Tech Career Center. So it's just another opportunity. None of these are cast in stone. They're all just ideas for the future, but they help us to build a little bit of a budget. And I think I probably outlined all of the items and the highlights on the right as I slowly went through that. So we'll kind of step forth from this one and go to the next. So we talked a little bit about next generation learning environment spaces as we talked through that, and it's hard to picture those. So one of the facilities that's been constructed recently is the Upper Marion Area High School, just down the road. And one of the things that you'll start to see as you go through some of these images are some of the things I just spoke about. So this is their dining commons used throughout the day. It has direct connection to the athletic complex, direct access to the performing arts complex. You can already see offices and counseling centers attached directly to that. It's probably used 16 hours a day. And that's the way those kinds of spaces are used as they've been built into the newer buildings these days. So that's one step. The next one, and just looking back at some of those, it also has the library commons, the reading areas and so on that become part of all of those complexes. The next one. So food service has become a little bit more like the scatter systems that you'd see in a college or a food court setup. Allowing students a little bit more flexibility in how they pick and choose and grab their food. Next slide. The athletics complex, you guys have athletics complexes. The question is, do you have the capacities that you need in those facilities, and do they offer the kinds of spaces that you need? And if you're to repurpose a couple of those for some other purposes, what might you build if you built new? So this is just an example of some of the new spaces that have multi-use, including the track that actually offers the opportunity to provide more seating on a second tier. Next one. So auditoriums, I was remarking as we walked in the space tonight, this is actually an acoustically adept space, and we walk into quite a few auditoriums that are very poorly designed from an acoustic standpoint. So this is a building and a space that probably needs a refresh. That's probably about where you are. The good news for it is that it has seating capacity, it has the ability to treat acoustics fairly well, and it would be an expansion. This just happens to be Upper Marion's. And all of the appropriate practice spaces around. The next step. These are the reading areas, and we'll just kind of move through some of the highlighted areas. So one of the big things that you start to see is the need for students to have their own project-based spaces as programs adjust and as students start to see the need to actually be producing while they're in school. So you'll find a lot of these as you walk through some of the current high school projects around. Next one. And whether you do something like this or you do something simpler in all of the clusters and pod areas, the intent here, and by the way, that's not staged, which is kind of cool, but the intent is to provide students these flexible learning areas that they can move out of the learning space that they're in and out into teaming spaces to work on projects. Next step. Same kind of thing looking the other direction. If we go to the next slide. So flexibility and adaptability and lots of daylight, critical to classrooms and learning spaces today. Next one. And the same thing for the instructors. And so that's exactly what this is. It's providing instructional planning centers throughout the building so that they are not married to a classroom. Instead, they have their own office spaces to be producing their lesson plans and doing all of the work that they do in a building. Next one. The STEAM Commons and STEAM spaces, we already heard about that this evening, and so these are the kinds of spaces that are necessary for the next generation learning. Next. Same thing, except for the Science Commons, and into the flexibility of the science and lab spaces, so they're not all of those fixed workstations that we've become so used to. Next. One of the more interesting things about buildings today is we are all learning that students don't use lockers. And so do you need to scatter lockers throughout a building and take up the amount of square footage that you do? The answer has been so far no, and hopefully that trend continues as students carry their own supplies on their backs. But this is what happens when you start to reduce and minimize the amount of lockers in a building. Next. So that's option one, and option one is really meant to encompass all of the ideas for next generation learning, plus bring ninth grade to the site. Option two as Dr. Bauer had mentioned, is not bringing ninth grade to the site and really doing everything that was talked about in the facility assessment conducted in 2017 and 2018. And that really is making all the systems in the building new, making all the finishes in the building new, but it's still the same configuration as what you had. This board remembers a presentation, or members of the board remember presentations back in 2018 where we talked about a certain dollar figure. The difference between that and now is the extreme escalation that we've seen in construction. It's also this opportunity to take the transportation center and move it off-site, and it's also the opportunity to develop the proposed athletic fields or parking on the radio station site. So option 2 is essentially taking the existing plan you have, converting it, and trying to improve the parking situation, improve the bus drop-off circulation, and add a few athletic fields. The differentiator here is that you do not get a ninth grade center or ninth grade addition out of this. So that's essentially what this represents. So the next slides are really about budgeting. And the budgeting has been done from the square footages that we generated with the program work that we did with all of the high school folks and some middle school folks talking about ninth grade and what you would need if you brought ninth grade up. So here are some of the estimated assumptions. Right now, the numbers have been escalated to 2023. And what Engineering News Record, one of the resources that we all use, spoke about recently was the 2 years ago escalation of 13% in the construction industry, and then last year's escalation of 8%. So do the compounded figure for yourself and figure out what that did to all of our construction numbers. What it assumes from this point forward, because we have nothing better to go with, is that it would be 4% annual escalation from that point on. And if you had asked us prior to these years what annual escalation should be, we would have said 4% to 5% annually. And so that's what these are figuring on. Second thing is we are breaking out for you construction costs versus soft costs. Some of you have heard this before, but just to emphasize this, construction costs are the hard costs that it takes to build the building and do the site work. What that doesn't include are things that we call soft costs, which are design fees, permitting costs, legal fees, contingencies, and probably some of the biggest numbers today that factor into that: furniture, fixtures, technology, and equipment. And the budgets that we've been building into projects lately for this, and you probably experienced with NAP, is pretty significant to buy new furniture, new technology throughout a facility. Both of these options, 1 and 2, anticipate the transportation center, both the acquisition of a new site for that and the construction of that, as Dr. Bauer mentioned. Both options represent comprehensive renovations of this building, regardless. What the differential here, though, is that option 1 takes around a $20 million round number and converts all of the interior spaces to that next generation learning space, whereas option 2 does not. Option 2 just renovates those spaces as they are today. Option 2, however, because you don't have expanded square footage to move students to as you phase your construction around the site, requires modulars on site. So you have a place to put students while you renovate a cluster or pod, then you move students around to the next one, renovate that one, and continue your way around the building. And the numbers that we have seen for the number of classrooms that you would need as temporary modulars are somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 million. That's a throwaway number because by the time you're done with those modulars, you don't need them anymore. So just keep that one in mind. Option 2 also assumes that the high school renovation costs that were derived from the 2018 assessment are escalated to today, as I mentioned at the beginning. So the next slides show the high-level estimated budgeting for options 1 and 2, as Dr. Bauer mentioned, and I think we could probably go to the next slide. So the top part is meant to show a number of the thought processes that went into each of these spreadsheets. The bottom part are the primary numbers that come out of those. And just so you know, those spreadsheets have been spread out and probably are this long at this point to try to show all the calculations to get here. But important to this is the transportation center construction value that you see in the blue, the ninth grade new construction additions portion, and the high school additions and renovations portions, and then the site acquisition for the transportation center. Those are built into these. So the construction costs and the escalation that we're talking about here takes that renovation cost and actually moves it out to probably between 2026 and 2029. So you're actually seeing the escalation out to that number, and that's why it gets all the way up to this $248 million number. Then you see the soft costs that go along with that to get to those final escalated costs on the right-hand side in the green, and those are the numbers that Dr. Bauer was speaking about earlier, $400 million plus dollars. Option 2 is the next slide, and this one is the one that represents just those renovations, and this is probably where you need to return to that number that Mr. Schneider was talking about or has talked about in the capital project list of $114 million, and take a look at what the actual renovation and addition construction value is. That's $145 million to do all of the things that we're talking about in the building. Again, the transportation center costs, the soft costs, and finally the escalated costs that get you to $236 million plus dollars. It's probably, it's very inappropriate for us to be showing things that say 236, 325, 945. This is just how the numbers calculate as they come out from a square foot cost, so just understand that. There's no fixed number here. These are all budgeted. And I think that's the end of these slides.
Great, thank you, Mr. Schrader.
Thank you.
So I do want to emphasize when Mr. Schrader and I were both speaking, we were talking about option 1 and option 2. It is certainly the recommendation of the administration that we do one of those two. No option is not an option, in our opinion. Option 1 or option 2. And I did say at the beginning, option 1 would require a referendum. And many folks don't know what a referendum is. So for the benefit of the community and our board, Mr. Scrocky, if you would please explain in great detail, what is a referendum and why do we say we need that for option 1?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bauer. First, I'd like to thank everyone for attending the meeting tonight, whether you're in person or watching online. I certainly appreciate your interest. So before I turn things over to our financial advisor, we do think it's important to give a little background about what a referendum is. And then later on this evening, I'll actually get in a little more detail about the process to conduct a referendum. So my opinion is a referendum is really the ultimate form of democracy. And next slide, Mr. Gilmer. What that means simply is the results of the question that is posed will be determined by the voters of North Penn School District. There will be a ballot question, and the voters will decide either yes or no, in favor of the project or not in favor of the project. So under option 1, we've determined that for this to be feasible, for us to be able to sustain the budget economically, a referendum would be necessary for the $400 million project that was outlined earlier. So a referendum can occur in one of 4 elections. It could be at a general election, a primary election, a municipal election, or a special election. And I'll talk more about what a special election means in a moment. There's actually a couple different types of referendum. The one we're going to be talking about tonight is authorized under the Local Government Unit Debt Act. It's also known as an electoral debt referendum. So that contrasts with another type of referendum called a back-end referendum. A back-end referendum is for a school district to have its budget passed that would be in excess of the Act 1 index. And I'll explain what the Act 1 index is in a moment. But for tonight's purposes, when we talk about a referendum, we're talking about an electoral debt referendum. Okay, so if the referendum would be approved, it does a couple things for the school district. Number one, it would allow that debt that's part of the referendum to be exempt from the borrowing base. So you might be thinking, what the heck is a borrowing base? A borrowing base is an arithmetic calculation that we're required to conduct as part of the Debt Act to determine how much debt the school district is legally able to incur. So to give you an example, North Penn School District, our legal limit of debt is roughly $621 million for the entire school district. We have about $65 million right now in outstanding debt. So you subtract the $65 million from the $621 million, And that leaves us with approximately $556 million in available debt capacity, meaning that we could borrow under the Debt Act up to an additional $556 million. However, any debt incurred via a referendum would not count towards that $556 million cap. Okay, so when we're talking about a referendum, we are going to be talking about a referendum not on the entirety of option one. We're going to be talking about a referendum on a portion of option one, specifically the 9th grade edition, which is roughly $95 million. So that $95 million will be exempt from that borrowing base limitation. The second thing, if passed, the referendum would allow any debt incurred to be exempt from our Act 1 limit. And Act 1 was a law passed in 2006. It basically establishes an inflationary index each year for a school district. And a school district cannot raise taxes higher than that Act 1 index, with a couple exceptions. There's a special education exception, there's a pension exception, and there's also an exception for electoral debt. So the chart that's showing right now is the historical Act 1 figures since 2006. Our Act 1 index this year in the school district is 3.4%. The Act 1 index for next year, next fiscal year, which starts July 1st, is already known. It's going to be 4.1%. And there are 3 additional years that are projected by the Independent Fiscal Office in the state of Pennsylvania, 4.5%, 4%, and 3.8%. So any debt that's incurred via electoral referendum means that the school board could elect to raise taxes above those figures. Okay? And that portion would be for that electoral debt portion. Okay? So before we turn things over to our financial advisor, just a couple additional items. You might hear tonight a reference to a bond rating. And it's important to note what the bond rating here is in North Penn School District, because that does have a direct effect on our ability to borrow at certain interest rates. The higher the bond rating, the lower the rates in which we can borrow. It's almost like a personal credit score, like your FICO score. The higher the score, the lower the rate when you go to borrow money. Now, North Penn School District, we use Moody's Investor Services for our bond rating. Some school districts use S&P. There are a couple other smaller rating agencies, but we use Moody's, and at North Penn School District, our bond rating is a AA1. That is the second highest rating that's possible. AAA is the highest rating. So in Pennsylvania, there are only 20 school districts with a AA1 or higher rating. So we are definitely an elite company when it comes to our bond rating. And the primary reason why our bond rating is so high is because the level of reserves or fund balance that the school district has. So that allows us to borrow money at a cheaper cost, which saves taxpayer dollars when you factor in the interest expense that comes along with it. And finally, you heard Mr. Schrader talk about some financial assumptions and budget assumptions. You'll hear our financial advisor talk about assumptions also. And I think it's really important to say that the financial assumptions that you'll hear tonight, those are the assumptions of administration. They are not the assumptions of our financial advisor. Our internal team met and reviewed through multiple meetings and multiple studies to determine what the final assumptions are. So again, you will hear assumptions tonight, but please, it can't be understated the fact these assumptions are from administration. They are not from our financial advisor. So Dr. Bauer, I'll turn it back to you for introductions of our financial advisor, PFM.
Great, thank you, Mr. Scrocky. So for those at home or in the audience, I did start off by saying we have 75 slides. We are on slide 48, so we appreciate you staying with us. We certainly recognize how important this information is, and I also recognize it's a long presentation, but it warrants such detail. So without further ado, we've heard enough about our financial advisors. Here they are. This is Zach Williard from PFM. Zach.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bauer. Yeah, so I know you've got a lot of information thrown at you. Just kind of hang tight here, because this is where we get to the part where we're saying, what does this mean to you as a taxpayer? Okay. So real quickly, there's 11 slides that I'm going to walk through. Some of it is kind of set up in background to get to what does this mean for me as a taxpayer. So kind of hang through. We're going to describe option one kind of in great detail, the borrowing plan, what this might look like. You know, similar to what Mr. Schrader said, these are estimates. We're going to borrow money over, you know, a 5 or 7 year period. We don't know where rates will be, but we can make educated guesses as to what this would look like. And this is meant to be an illustration of, you know, how this might look when all the dust settles. So we're going to walk through option one in more detail, and then we're going to get to a slide at the end of option one that says, what is the cost, the estimated cost to the taxpayer? Okay, we're going to walk through that slide in detail. Then we're going to move on to option two. The slides read the same. We'll go through that one a little bit quicker because it's a little bit simpler of a borrowing plan. Then we'll get to a slide at the end of option two that says, what does this mean to me as a taxpayer? Okay, those are kind of the two main slides you want to hold in your head. And then finally, there's a last summary slide where you're comparing the cost of the taxpayer from option one to option two. Because as we've heard, I think a few times, you know, from administration tonight, the plan is to move forward with either option one or option two. So really, when you're comparing the cost as a taxpayer, you want to look at option one versus option two, not, you know, one or the other, okay? So on this first slide, you know, again, we're PFM. We've worked with the district going back to 2010, you know, and one of our main roles with school districts across the state and specifically North Penn here is to work through long-term borrowing plans for capital projects, okay? Now, the planning for this project or these options began back in 2018. So this has been going on for, you know, about 5 years. We've been running different scenarios, different options as the districts mold, you know, different versions of how this project might look over the years. And kind of that's how we connected all the dots to get here tonight to talk about option one and option two as being presented. Okay? Next slide. So a couple of the assumptions in the model that are important. The draw schedules that we're going to show you, those were provided to us by the district's architect. And as we said, you know, those are estimated numbers. They're not final firm costs right now, but that's what we're working with, okay? Both of these options do, I'm sorry, go back. I was taking a sip of water there. Both of these options assume a $3 million borrowing in 2023 to acquire new land for the transportation center. The third assumption is that these borrowings would be done on a tax-exempt basis. The reason you care about that is tax-exempt interest rates, which the district is allowed to borrow with, are lower than taxable rates, you know, that a regular homeowner would use to do a mortgage or a car loan. So that's good. You know, it's a way to help keep the client financing costs as low as possible. The option where we talk about non-electoral borrowing, so that's non-referendum debt, okay? Those are done using a 25-year wraparound structure. Now, a wraparound debt service structure, and we'll show you a graph that illustrates that, what that's used for by school districts and borrowers across Pennsylvania is it's used to minimize the budgetary impact to the taxpayer. So that's the point of it. Okay, it's supposed to keep the cost as low as possible in an upfront budgetary standpoint. Now, the other version of this borrowing that we're going to show you is the electoral, the referendum borrowing. Okay, now that will be done on a 25-year level structure. You cannot utilize the wrap around structure for the referendum debt. Each of these financings that we're going to show you in here are based on current market rates with an additional 0.25% of interest rate cushion to account for future rate risk. Part of the reason we borrow over time is to hedge interest rates. Sometimes we'll hit the market higher, sometimes we'll hit the market lower. Okay, so again, this is meant to be an illustration of what this might look like. We are assuming that the money that you borrow is invested at a 2.5% interest rate. Again, that rate will certainly change. It might be higher, it might be lower. The current investment rate is probably closer to a 5%. But those interest earnings will be used to downsize the amount of money needed to fund the project. Okay, so that part of the interest rate curve is helpful to the district in that standpoint. This also assumes that the district currently has about $14 million in its budget for existing debt service. Okay, so that's how we calculate where it's going to go in the future. This assumes the value of $1 million to be just over $7 million, $7,056,654. Okay, so if the district was to raise $1 million, that's what it would add to the district's budget. These assumptions in here also assume a Montgomery County resident, okay, for all the numbers that we're going to show you, and it assumes the AA1 rating. And the most important assumption of all, which I think we have listed on a bunch of these slides, is that all of the millage increases that we're showing you in this presentation are specific to the projects of either option one or option two. This is not to say that the millage rate of the district would not go higher. Over the next 20 or 30 years, it would certainly be a safe bet to assume that the district will have to increase tax rates to pay for other operational expenses of the district, okay? That is not what we're talking about tonight. We're simply talking about the projects at hand, option 1 and option 2. So I want to make that very clear. Okay, so let's start option 1. So this is the draw schedule, okay? So we're not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but if you look in kind of the red highlighted box in column 3, that shows the 9th grade standalone building, cost of about $94 million. Okay, that was talked about as part of option 1. And when you look at the top of the slide, it does assume that this is a referendum would be used in order to borrow the money for this. So again, the taxpayers would vote if we would like to do this option, and then we would do the 9th grade school in addition to the high school in column 4, the transportation center in column 5, and the land acquisition in column 6. So again, this draw schedule will change, the timing will change, the final costs will likely be different. They could be higher or lower based on final construction bids, but this is kind of what we're working with today. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I know this slide has a lot of numbers on it. The reason we care about this slide is it's going to show you how we're going to phase in the debt for these projects. So kind of going left to right, in the black and white left column, it shows this is your budget year, okay, going out all the way out to 2055. Then the next column shows the existing debt service of the district. Okay, so that's what you have now if you do nothing. Those are your debt service payments. Now what we're going to do in steps 1 through 7, okay, starting in the green column, we're going to borrow at the top, you can see about $14 million. That's going to be phased into the budget as a wraparound debt service structure. So when you go down the column, you can see you have lower payments up front, and then as the existing debt pays off in the black and gray column, then the larger payments kick in. This is done, again, to minimize the upfront budget impact, to minimize the impact to taxpayers. Okay, it's a very common strategy utilized by school districts. So we're going to go through the borrowing plan, borrowing the amounts listed at the tops under steps 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And basically what you're going to get to when all the dust settles on the non-electoral debt, okay, this is not the referendum piece, this is the non-electoral debt, is you're going to go from the column on the left, where it shows you about $11.7 million, to the column on the far right, where you can see it maxes out at about $21.5 million. So that's going to be the increase in the debt service in order to fund the projects here. Now again, we're doing it in multiple steps for a couple reasons. One, in order to phase this into your budget, to phase in the impact to the taxpayers over multiple years versus having it hit all at once. Okay, if you borrow all the money at once, it hits your budget all at once. Okay, that can create issues. 2, we're going to hedge interest rate risk by borrowing in multiple tranches. Okay, and 3, we're borrowing the money in a manner that consistent with the architect's draw schedule that says you're going to spend this money, then we're going to borrow the next phase. They will spend the money, borrow the next phase. If you borrow it all at once and it's just sitting there, and the architect can't spend it fast enough on the project, there's a negative drag to that, negative cost to that. So those are the reasons that we do this borrowing plan in multiple steps. Okay, next slide, please. So on this slide, we're talking about, this is the referendum piece. This is the electoral debt, okay? So if you look at the top, this is a 3-step borrowing plan. It would be done in conjunction with the other phases. There's about $95,462,000 of proceeds here with these 3 borrowings. Now again, these are done as level payment structures. So if you scroll down any of the columns, you can see the payments are within $5,000 of each other. That is, again, because electoral debt, it's harder to do a wraparound debt service structure. It's not as efficient. So these are done as 3 25-year level structure payment structures. Over in the second column to the far right, it's the subtotal of about $6.4 million. So when you add that onto the $21 million that we talked about on the previous page, and you look at the far right-hand column, your debt's going up to about $27 million through the life of the project. Now that is a big number. Okay, it's a big project, and North Penn has a big budget. So that is approximately where we think the debt would get to. Now we're going to show you all this on the next page in a graphical form, which I think will be helpful as we get to the slide number 7. So on this page, it's all the same numbers. We're just trying to show it in kind of a simpler format. So when you look at the left-hand side and you watch as the colors kind of tear up, that's as we're phasing in the debt service. Now on the next slide, we're going to show you how the impact to the taxpayer happens over multiple years. That's because of this phase-in. Okay, if we borrowed it all at once, it would hit you all at once. So because of the phase-in that you see on the far left-hand side, That's going to translate into a phase into the taxpayer. And then at the very top in kind of the dotted green boxes, that's where the debt levels off at that $28 million that we just talked about, that number. And then as the debt starts to pay off, the taxes specific to this project would come down and then eventually be paid off in 2055. Now, while that's not an eternity, it is about 32 years. So, we just want to make sure that that's clear when we get to the next slide, and it shows you what the taxpayer impact is. So again, another busy slide, but let's try to simplify it. So we're going to talk about the blue and the green, okay? The red and the purple, those are kind of extrapolations of the green. So let's focus on blue and green. So if you start from the left-hand side, and we'll go to the right-hand side, over on the left, it says the current budget year, the millage rate is 28.47. Okay, so when you get your tax bill, that's going to be in your tax bill. The other magical number in the tax bill is the assessed value at the top. So the top gray box where it says 150,000 above the green, that is what the assessed value of your property and home would be. Okay, and how you get your tax dollar impact is you take the $150,000, multiply it by 28.47, the millage rate, and you divide by 1,000, and that tells you that your tax bill on your current property, if you look down column green in the first yellow box there, $4,271. So if you own a property that's assessed at $150,000, your current tax bill is about $4,200. Okay. So then on the far left-hand side, as we go down the years, you can see those years coincide with the debt from the previous pages. Okay. The millage rate is going to increase. As that debt starts to come online, the millage rate will go higher. As the second column in the blue, first it goes higher by 0.40, then by 0.14, then by 0.02, until the debt is fully phased in at that $28 million number that we showed you on the previous page. Okay, so what does this mean for me? So let's go to the green columns. The estimated annual increase in the first green column shows that in the 25-26 school year, they would estimate that $61 increase to your tax bill. The following year, a $22 tax increase to your tax bill. Then $3, then $99, $65, and $42. Okay? If you look at the second green column, that shows the cumulative increase. So again, you see the first $61, and then you add $22 to that for the following year, and it goes up to $83. Then you add $3.86 and so on. So the tax bill would increase to about $293 over what your current tax bill is in order to do option one, the option one project. Okay? Then you go down, if you go down to $293, you see it starts to dip down to $261, $206, $156. When you look at the dates on the right, that's as the debt starts to pay off on that far right-hand side of the graph that we just showed you. Your tax bill will then go down specific to this project, okay, because you'd be paying off the debt from the project. All right? So now when you look at the bottom of the green columns when we get into the yellow, the estimated maximum real estate tax from the financing plan would go from $4,271 up to $4,564. Okay, that's by adding the $293 to your tax bill. What does that mean over the 32-year period? It would mean that your taxes over that 32-year period would go up about $7,165. Okay? So if you spread it out over the 32 years, that would be the total impact over the 32-year period. All right? Now, if we look down at the bottom, I want to just make sure we say those assumptions. The reason we're sticking with the $150,000 assessed value is that is the median assessed home value for the district, $150,000. Again, this is based on a Montgomery County resident. And again, the millage equivalent that we're talking about here is specific to the project. It is likely that the district between now and 2055 will certainly have additional tax increases for operational expenses. So again, I just want to point out this is for the project.
Zach, can I interrupt you real quickly? Just a common misconception, and I certainly know all our board members know this, but there's a difference, and Zach said this, but I want to reiterate, there's a difference between assessed home value and implied market value. So I think a lot of people see $150,000 for an assessed home value, and they think that's not the average, right? But the implied market value for that home in the green in the middle here is roughly $380,000 for the average implied market value. So just delineate that. And then just in my layman's terms here, because I am not a financial advisor, if we're still in the green, the left-hand side, the estimated annual increase, that is the change in your real estate tax bill as a result of this project. Okay, so from that first year, that increase, your bill would go up $61. From that, the next year, it would go up $22, and then $3, and so forth. So after 32 years, just tell me if I'm wrong, you can correct me. After 32 years, the impact of this would be $7,000 to this homeowner.
Correct.
So in the year 2055, the net pay for this project for me as a taxpayer would be $7,000.
Right. And on the last slide, we're going to break that down to, on average, what does that cost you a year? Okay. But for this purposes, that's the impact. And the point about I forgot to mention the implied market value, but that's a good point because most people don't think of their home in terms of assessed value. You look at your tax bill and you see the assessed value. Most people think, what is my current market value of my home? And the way that you figure that out is each county has what's called a common level ratio. Okay. In Montgomery County, the common level ratio is 39.6%. Okay. They take all of the sales data from the county. There's a 2-year lag to the common level ratio. So this is based on sales data from 2021, but they use that in order to take the assessed value and translate it into more of, something that people understand, which is what is the current market value. And as I said before, the red and the purple are just different versions of this. So the purple's for a $100,000 assessed home or market value of about $252,000, and the red is for a $300,000 assessed home or about a $758,000 current market value. And you can extrapolate higher or lower from there. Okay, great. So if we could go to the next slide. So that was kind of the main slide for option 1. So now option 2 is going to read the same as we walk through these slides. Okay, so option 1 draw schedule is attached. Again, this does not have any referendum debt, any electoral debt. It does not have the 9th grade relocation. So we're talking about a project of about $236 million. Next slide, please. So here is the borrowing plan again for this option. Okay, so to quickly walk through this again, you're going from the black and gray and white column on the left-hand side of about $11 million. And in this situation, you're going up to about $17.3 million. So rather than the $28 million number we mentioned before, this option tops out at about $17.3 million. Next slide, please. So now we're back to this slide. So what does this mean as a taxpayer? So in this scenario, it's a much quicker phase-in of the debt. So when you look in the green column, you can see in the 25 budget year, your taxes are expected to go up by about $8. The following year, about $64 for a maximum increase of $72, okay, over the life of the project. And then, as we said, it would pay off, the debt would pay off at about 2053, at which point the taxes for this project would go back down. So what does that mean over the 32-year period of the debt? You're looking at about $2,015 as the total impact. Okay. So now on the next slide, we're going to compare the total impact from option 1 and the total impact for option 2. Okay, because again, if the district's going to move forward with one or the other, we think that's kind of what you should be, focused on. So we're going to again focus on the middle column of $150,000 assessed value. Okay, so as we said, the total cost there would be $7,165 estimated over the 32-year period. Okay, for option 1. Now, if we look in option 2, the total cost over the 32-year period would be about $2,015. So when you're comparing option 1 and option 2, the difference between the two for a taxpayer with a $150,000 assessed value home would be $5,150 estimated. Over that 32-year period, if you divide that by 32, you come up with an average annual tax increase of about $161 a year. Now, that's not cumulative, that's every year. Every year you'd pay $161 more than you would if no project was done versus option 1.
Great, thank you, Zach. So I recognize we're about an hour into this, and if we lost you at any point, I encourage anyone at home, anyone on stage, or anyone in the audience, this is the slide. We've met with a couple home and school associations. We're trying to speak to a lot of our elementary parents because those are the students who will reap the benefits in the long run of a new facility here 8-9 years down the road. Everyone asks, what's it mean for me? And honestly, that last line that Zach just mapped out for you is the most important part. We are saying that we are recommending one of these two options. So one of the two will happen. If we choose option 2, which is the basic renovation, the estimated total cost for the average home is $2,000 over 32 years. Okay? For option 1, which is adding 9th grade to this campus and reimagining the spaces, the cost over 32 years would be about $7,000 for a total difference of about $5,000. And so, on average, how much will that cost me a year? The difference between the two is $161. So, like, if you take nothing else away, that's the takeaway. $161 a year on average over the 32 years here. So that left-hand column is for the assessed home, the assessed, not market value, the assessed home at $300,000. That's $322. And that last column was for the assessed home at, $100,000, value of $252,000. That difference would be $107 to go with option 1 as opposed to 2.
Good summary.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
That was very helpful. Okay, so now we have 2 more speakers. We're going to kick it back to Mr. Scrocky because he kind of outlined what is a referendum, and then we heard from PFM about what would the borrowing look like and how would that impact me as a taxpayer. So now Mr. Scrocky is going to explain a little bit more about, okay, what's a referendum process look like if we do this here. Go ahead, Mr. Scrocky.
Thank you, Dr. Bauer. Yes, I'll talk about the referendum process and a timeline, what that might be based on the timeline that we'll talk about in a moment. Mr. Schrader is going to talk about the specific construction timeline. But the referendum process goes like this. The school board would need to adopt a resolution in advance of the election. Again, we mentioned that there's different types of elections. We'll talk about that in a moment. The board would need to conclude that electoral debt is advisable, and the board would need to specify the actual ballot question. That would be part of the resolution. So in terms of the ballot question, it's important to note that there's very little flexibility in the language as outlined in the law. So based on the numbers that we looked at tonight, this is what we would anticipate the ballot question looking like. It would read as follows. Shall debt in the total sum of $94,640,444 for the purpose of financing the construction of a new 9th grade addition at North Penn High School be authorized to be incurred as debt approved by the electors? That's it. The only flexibility we have is to change the dollar amount. That would be part of the board's resolution if the estimates change, or change the project, but we don't expect the project to change. We are expecting the electoral debt referendum, if the board authorizes it, would be for the 9th grade addition. But that's it. There's really no other latitude with respect to how that ballot question can read. So I mentioned earlier that there are 4 elections where the electoral debt could be on the ballot: general, primary, municipal, and special. So we do have a municipal election coming up November 7th, 2023. So that is one option. The ballot question could be placed on the municipal election on November 7th, 2023. So contrast that with a special election. A special election could be a date picked by the board that would not coincide with a regular election. However, for a special election, the district would need to pay the associated costs for that election. That payment would be made to the Montgomery County Board of Election. The ballot question would need to be submitted to the Board of Election at least 45 days before the election. Now, we did reach out to the Board of Election to get a cost estimate of what that would be. We're still working with the Board of Election to try to determine that amount, but we think that could be somewhere in the neighborhood of $70,000 to $80,000. So again, in terms of the timeline with respect to some of the schematic design and construction timeline that we're looking at, theoretically, the special election could probably happen in one of 2 months, either December of this year or January of 2024. And that would sync up with the timeline that Mr. Schrader is going to talk about in a moment. So for the special election to occur, there's a couple other items that we need to consider. In particular, there are certain advertising requirements in local newspapers as well as the county legal journal. Specific timelines do need to be met. And based on those timelines, the reality of it is the board resolution to authorize the referendum would need to occur between October 10th and December 19th. And that's based on the municipal election, and that's based on the primary election in 2024. There are certain timelines that we would need to adhere to. So that window of opportunity to conduct a special election in December, or most likely January, that resolution would need to be passed between those dates, October 10th and December 19th. So what happens if the referendum would be successful? The majority of voters in North Penn School District say yes to that ballot question, and it really needs to be just 50.01% of the voters. One more yes vote than no vote, the referendum passes. That would allow the board to exceed the Act 1 index for that electoral debt. So I talked before about the Act 1 index. If the electoral debt represented 0.2%, and the Act 1 index was 4.1%, that means the board could have the authority to raise taxes up to 4.3%. It's important to note that the proceeds from any electoral debt are kept in a separate account, and they can only be used for the cost of the project listed in the ballot question. They cannot be commingled with any other funds. And also that electoral debt and millage rate that was phased in, that needs to be reduced once the bonds are paid off. So electoral debt referendums don't occur too often in the Commonwealth. Since Act 1 has passed, I believe there are somewhere around 20 electoral debt referenda throughout the state of Pennsylvania, and there have been only 2 that have been successful, and both were for high school projects. The first successful referendum was at Upper Dublin High School. That was a new high school construction project. Upper Dublin is located in Montgomery County. This was back in 2007, and their referendum question was for $119 million, and they conducted their referendum via a special election, a separate date that did not coincide with a general municipal or primary election. Their voter turnout was a 62.5% of those individuals that voted yes for the project, so the project passed. The second successful electoral debt referendum was at State College Area High School in Center County. This was conducted back in 2014. This was a high school project, but the electoral debt referendum was only for a portion of the project. It was $85 million. That was a piece of the overall project. At State College Area High School, they conducted their referendum at a primary election, and their results were almost 75%, 3-1 in terms of the vote. Okay, so what would happen if the referendum was defeated? Again, if there's one additional no vote, then yes vote, then the referendum fails. What happens in that situation is that no referendum for the same purpose can be put forth to the voters for at least 155 days. So you could go back and ask the voters the same thing for the same project, for the same amount, but you would need to wait at least 155 days to ask that same question. And if the referendum fails, bonds cannot be issued for that exact same project. Again, we are talking about a 9th grade addition, so if the referendum would fail, we would simply be looking at option 2 at that point. Okay, as Dr. Bauer mentioned, it's sort of like an either or. Option 1 moves forward if the referendum passes. If the referendum fails, then option 2 gets put forth. Okay, Dr. Bauer, turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scracchi, and I know Ms. Wesley is listening online, and she always says that you give a master class when you are talking about finances, so definitely we had referendum 101 in your first presentation, referendum 201 in the second. So now Mr. Schrader is going to come forward, and kind of the last bit of information before we talk about where we go from here is just a rough timeline of when this could all happen, if the referendum passes or not, and the construction. Mr. Schrader.
Thank you, Dr. Bauer. We're going to go to 2 slides, and these both represent option 1. So reflecting on Mr. Scracchi's dates of either December or January for a referendum process, These are the items that would need to happen between now and then. So the blue, which is the second set of rows shown, are the pre-referendum planning. And essentially what is shown in all of those boxes is a true schematic design. And the goal there is to develop a schematic design that can be estimated by an outside estimator in September and October of this year to arrive at that final number that goes into that advertisement that Mr. Scrocky just noted. So where he noted somewhere in the neighborhood of $95 million, you'd go through a design process, you would determine what the total cost of this project might be at that point, and then you would advertise that portion, that is the 9th grade edition portion, which is what he was reflecting. I guess it's in this red, referendum represents the kinds of things that would go on between now and the referendum itself. These are the publicity type portions of the process that you would go through. And assuming all of that passes sometime in January, then you would begin the design process. So understand that you're not going through the true construction document process until you've been authorized for that referendum to move through. So then you would see design occurring between probably February of 2024 through April of 2025. The permitting would be coincident with that because the permitting obviously happens as the design process is evolving. This is assuming a fairly positive process in permitting, and you have many permits that you'd have to go through for the process. The second slide then starts to show, if you go to the next one. Yes, so the next one then talks about the transportation center getting built off-site. So you would have to obviously acquire a property, then you would have to build that transportation center off-site to make room on the site to allow for this construction phasing to begin to occur. The yellow represents the high school bid and award, which ultimately could happen in 2025. And then the bottom portion, all of the green area, represents all of the different construction phases. And the first 3 of those sets of bars represent the new construction portions of the building. And then finally, you start to see you hopping around the building doing the phasing from pod to pod. So ultimately ending up in a project that is probably complete in the 2029-2030 timeframe. I think it's important to note that this being option 1, if you went to option 2 and the referendum failed and you decided quickly to move forward with that option 2 concept, you could meet similar timelines to this. You may be able to take about 18 months to 2 years off of the process because you're not building the new construction portions first. Instead, you're bringing the modulars onto site to accommodate the students as they move around. So that gives you a sense of the timeline for the process.
Great, thank you, Mr. Schrader. Okay, so now this concludes our presentation, and I will have you know that we estimated in our meetings the last couple weeks that this presentation would last us 90 minutes. We are 85 minutes in. So I'm fairly pleased with the process, and we are delightening us, apparently. We lost some lights in here. I'm not sure what happened, guys, but anyway. Okay. Couple things. One, at the top of the hour here, we talked about how on April 13th, that will be a community forum. We'll certainly have representatives from PFM, Schrader Group, administration, and the school board up on stage answering questions, kind of a Q&A with the community. You will see on this slide here, which everything is posted in board docs, there's going to be a form to submit questions in advance just so we can kind of start to compile an FAQ sheet for the website. We're really excited about the artist formerly known as the Bus to the Future. We are calling it the Bus to North Penn's Reimagined Future. So we will start here on April 3rd with a busload of folks. We will have breakfast in the library. We'll give a tour of North Penn High School. And then instead of going around the district and looking at some of our schools, we're going to take a bus to Upper Marion High School. And you saw pictures in the slides tonight of what that looks like. I've been there a number of times throughout their construction process, and it is really exciting to see. So unfortunately, that will only allow for us to take about 50 members of our community with us, because it's one bus, and Upper Marion are being gracious hosts. So Mr. Gilmer and his team, along with some students and some teachers, are actually going to live stream the tour. So we will be at Upper Marion High School. We will have it on Facebook Live, so anybody in the community can watch us walk around, Q&A, all those things. Kind of envision, if you recall, when we did Dr. Dietrich's farewell parade, and we streamed that on Facebook. This will be something similar. So we're really excited about that. We also have a website. Mr. Gilmer, I don't know if you're able to open that website. So the communications department, specifically Mr. Gilmer, I believe, developed this website. It is live this evening, as is the sign up for Bus to North Penn's Reimagined Future. We're going to have every presentation we've given to the board since 2017 posted on there from YouTube. We are going to have all the documents, cost estimates, all the things you saw this evening, and in the traffic study, the enrollment study, all the central warehouse, in addition to the frequently asked questions and so forth. So you can see here there's a video that is on that website. I encourage you to take a look. It will go live this evening, and it will continue to grow with resources about this project. So tonight, you had the opportunity, board members, community, and those watching at home, to hear a little bit about why we believe ninth grade should come, the administration believes ninth grade should come to the high school campus, what that would take financially for that to happen, what a referendum is and what our timeline may look like, and ultimately what would happen if the referendum passes or fails, and the taxpayer impact of that. Again, April 13th, mark your calendars. We want folks to come out to ask questions and engage with us. And with that, we are 88 minutes into what I thought would be a 90-minute presentation. We will certainly entertain any questions from the board, or if you want to wait until April 13th, you're welcome to do that as well, prior to public comment. So, any questions? No? Okay, let's move on. No, please, fire away.
This is Kathy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
All right, if it's okay, I just have two questions for Mr. Schrader, if I could, President Stoll. One is for Mr. Schrader around the soft costs. Because of the difference between the two projects, option one and option two, the soft costs seem to be fairly close together, despite, again, I guess it's about $150 million delta between the total costs.
So thank you. The soft costs, though, regardless of which one you do, you are going to be buying new furniture, new technology, new audiovisual, and all of those things for both building, or for the building, just as if you would in option one. So that makes up a very large portion of that, as do all of the fees, permits, and other things. So that's part of the reason that those numbers are much closer than the construction values.
Thank you, Mr. Schrader. Second question is specific to the debt service and taxpayers paying back when they'll have to, and then what, I guess, what safeties are in place so that when design and actual construction start, that this does not become a front-end loaded payment back to contractors and subs.
I'll start, and then I think Zach will finish up here. The way that the debt service was constructed so far, the draw schedules were built around what we assumed to be the construction at this point. And so if you kind of look at how the new construction portion factors in, which is the early portion of option one, that tends to be the heavier load initially. And obviously that has to happen within those first 2 years. So that will be fairly consistent with what you see. From that point forward, it's a little nebulous today because we don't know exactly what will happen in each of the phases, but you do see it's fairly evenly broken out between the years. So I think that the draw could be reasonable if you're stepping around and doing reasonable square footages of the building in phase. So that's kind of how the draw schedule is broken out. And Zach, maybe you can expound.
Yeah, and so the borrowing, I think I talked about how we're going to phase in the borrowings, and there was a couple different reasons, and one of the three reasons was that we're going to tie the borrowings to the construction schedule. So, you know, I had a sample schedule in here. We're assuming that'll change, you know, as plans kind of move forward, but we'll kind of tailor the borrowings to make sense and to tie to when you need the money for the actual projects. So I think that answers the second part of the question.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mrs. Wesley. Does anyone else have any questions? Go ahead, Mr. Costa.
Thanks, Madam President. When we look at option two, a lot less red than option one. I understand what it means to have the renovation, so just a couple questions. Does that include Are any of the ADA renovations, are they similar in option 1 and option 2? And then I have a follow-up.
So option 2 does take care of all of the needs of the building, including all of the code, ADA, and so on. What you did not see in there was you didn't see the $20 million to take each of the clusters and convert the central parts of the clusters or pods into kind of centralized learning spaces in each of those. But in each case, option 1 and option 2, it has the same kinds of upgrades from a code and system standpoint, as well as the envelope, the building envelope.
And so my follow-up, looking at option 2, are we refreshing the same spaces essentially? So when we're looking at the band rehearsal space, the gym, we're basically putting the exact same students in the exact same spaces, they're just refreshed?
No, option 2 is thank you, I interpreted your question backwards there. Option 2 takes those students and puts them back into the classrooms, and I think that's what you just asked. They're new, clean, finished, new finishes, and new systems classrooms, but they're the same classrooms.
The space is essentially the same. So to infer from that option 1, the difference is that it's going to, in reimagining that space, is going to open up the opportunities for additional learning, not putting the students in the exact same places. So we have more flexibility in option 1?
In option 1, the hope is that you get more teaming spaces, collaborative spaces, small group spaces, and so on. All of those things that you're seeing are the needs of students today.
And are those spaces that, in your experience, also benefit, so the option 1 spaces also have additional benefits for students with disabilities as opposed to the current footprint that we would be keeping in option 2?
Boy, that's an interesting question. And I guess if I work my way around the buildings today that have those multiple spaces, you will find the opportunities for those students who might have mobility challenges to be in different types of spaces or different learning modalities with support staff and so on, trying to learn in different ways rather than trying to find a corner of a classroom or trying to find a hallway space or something like that to do the kinds of things that they need to do.
So it's reasonable to understand your statement that it increases inclusionary practices in option 1.
I think the buildings that we've seen with those spaces tend to have improved inclusionary spaces, yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Mr. Casa, one thing that really stuck out, and we went to see, those who didn't see the February work session, please do. But we went to see a number of high schools, and one of them in particular stands out. And they had an area of the building for their post-12 students, and it was truly like an apartment or townhouse, right? We do have some spaces in the North Penn School District for students for transition purposes, but this was a whole wing of the building or area of the building where the floors were different, and it felt like a home. And as soon as you walked into this space, you knew that that was the purpose. So far more inclusive than what you would see in the current environment, and one of the things that got all of us very excited. Great question, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Rush, go ahead.
When I look at the renovation, I say to myself, what do employers want when they come to an area? And I would think that an employer like Merck, who has a big footprint here and is looking to expand, would be looking at the educational experience that the children of their employees can get in an area. And if we look at it from that perspective, I think we can look at it as investment in the future of our community, not only benefiting our kids, not only benefiting our property values, but also impacting the environmental of our community. And besides that, if I were a teacher or an educator, I would definitely want to be in a cleaner, better, brighter environment to teach my students. So I think it has so many benefits, this project, and thank you for letting me speak.
Yeah, Mr. Resch, along those lines, we've actually had a couple meetings over at Merck and talked about engaging them a bit and helping us to design some of the science labs, and workspaces as well. So they're excited to partner with us in the project, and certainly we'll reach out to other community businesses, but they are probably the largest employer outside of the school district in our area. So thank you.
Mr. Fusco? Oh,
Yeah.
no, go ahead. Mr. Fusco could go. I'll go after Mr. Fusco.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So I'm wondering, I know that Springford's high school was built in the 90s. I know that so was Haverhill Horsham's, because that's where I went to school. Clearly Upper Marion's was just constructed. But relative to the other districts' high school in Montgomery County, 1971, how do we compare in terms of our facility? Do we have the oldest? Are there others that are actually even older than this building?
I will be happy to get back to you on April 13th with that information. But off the top of my head, just those closest to us, I know that Penn Ridge High School is new, Souderton High School is new, Perk Valley has been renovated, Upper Perk has been renovated, Central Bucks, certainly CB South was opened in 2006, I believe, and that is brand new as well. East and West were both renovated in the last 10 years. So our immediate neighbors, I can't think of one that hasn't been touched since the 70s. Mr. Schrader? Yeah, but I'll firm that up, no problem.
So, and I do think it's an important point, I mean, besides the obvious comparison, that, you know, a person's home value is pretty directly correlated to the district, right? A lot of people have been sort of making an issue out of some of the rankings in the district, like niche, for example. You know, and these are the things that people use to gauge one district over another. If you actually look at the niche rating, you'll see that the area in which North Penn far and away does the poorest is facilities, right? Everything else, you know, preparation for college, A+, diversity plus, A+, academics, A. It's really our facilities that I think people see as, you know, a detriment to the potential for their children to excel. We are a phenomenal district. We're a phenomenal district because we have phenomenal staff. We have phenomenal teachers. We have phenomenal administration. At the secondary level, what we do not have are phenomenal facilities, right? Which I think is why our administration is recommending that no action is no option, right? That something must be done at this point. We're talking about a building that's over 50 years old and only getting older. I think that while these numbers are intimidating, they're only going to get more expensive as time goes on. I think that we understand that's how inflation works. And I think that it is in the interest of the taxpayer to not only look at this from the aspect of the educational side of it, right? Because not everybody in the district has a student at North Penn. Or if they do, they may not be in elementary school, and they might say, well, how does this affect me? Why do I want to support this effort? And I think that there's a direct correlation between that. If you're going to look at those other schools and you're going to see those other districts, that if we're going to sit on our hands and we're not going to move forward, then I think that it's going to be a long-term detriment to this community with no action. So.
And I certainly know you didn't mean this, Mr. Fusco. I just want to make sure we're clear. Mr. Schneider's up here. Our facilities team does an awesome job. It's the facilities themselves.
I apologize. Yeah, no, our facilities, I mean, honestly, our facilities team, I don't know that there's probably a group that works harder in any district, you know, in the county because of what they have to work with here at North Penn.
Yeah.
Now, that certainly wasn't meant to be a slight at them. It was a direct slight at the actual buildings and structures themselves. So no, I definitely apologize if it's inarticulate in that particular observation.
And we do have the best support staff around.
Absolutely.
And it's undeniable among the students, the board of directors.
I mean, for us to continue to be such a highly ranked district, a highly ranked high school with such limited ability in our structural capacity, you know, with literal space. When we took a tour of these buildings, and I'm trying to picture 25 students in some of these rooms, you know, especially some of our art spaces, our band spaces, our classroom spaces, our FCS spaces, you know, with a kitchen that looks like it was, you know, renovated, would have been renovated twice by now if it were in a home. And I think that it just, it's doing the students in the community disservice that the facility is as old and in need of repair as it is. In need of updating, I should say, not repair. In need of an updating.
There's about $114 million worth of repair as well.
Yes, right. And there's that as well, of course.
Mrs. Ramich?
I know we're on the big questions, right? So option 1, option 2, but knowing what we learned from the NAP project, right? It was the teacher and student engagement and what the space needed and what they could do with it. With the website, with the future meetings, and I know that teachers have already been engaged in tours and in discussions. Is there an opportunity to hear teacher input, student input? We've heard from the Enact Club, for example, into what they want to see, what they need, and what they would do with a 21st century space.
Yeah, great, thank you. Very timely. So Mr. Nicholson, Ms. Liberoski, and I met with a group of 15 students today and went over today's presentation and talked to them a little bit and engaged them. Now, granted, they were 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, so we have to go beyond that, of course. The engagement thus far has been to help us design a concept for the purposes of an estimate, right? To kind of get that square footage that Mr. Schrader was speaking of. How many locker rooms will we need? How many English classrooms? How many, art spaces? What will we need to do to the auditorium? All those questions to try to wrap our heads around how much square footage we will need and in what capacity. So the conversations thus far have given us information to put out a intelligent and calculated estimate. In terms of the design and what things will look like, I can't wait for that process. Thinking about what it was for NAP and the ways in which we brought folks together to see what it could be for a high school and all the different student groups involved, stakeholders, and well beyond our school, like our community and small business owners, Merck, for example, as we said earlier. So we have seen from Schrader Group some images and some videos of how they go about that process. That could certainly be a part of our presentation and conversation April 13th, assuming in April we have a contract to actually design. Thank you, Mrs. Ramich.
Thank you, Mrs. Ramich. Mr. Murphy?
Thank you. Just to piggyback on what Mr. Fusco said a moment ago about the facilities, families in North Penn don't need a website or an algorithm to tell them it's the facilities that are holding students back, if there's anything holding back students at all. Look at slide 5, right? As a parent in the district, as an educator, that's what gives me pause, the fact that 70-some% of 9th grade students would have done more had they had the opportunity. And so my question is for Dr. Bauer, if we think about what 9th grade is now, what it could be, it's not just that 1 year, right? Because education is a cumulative building year upon year impact. Are we ready for the ripple effects of what happens when 9th graders come to this campus and they've got that first year language under their belt and they're ready for level 2 and level 3 and level 4 across the curricular boards? Are we ready for, that kind of impact?
Yeah, certainly we are excited for that challenge. I'm reminded on a daily basis why we are the only school district in Montgomery County that do not have 9th graders on their campus. So as a result, we would have to take a look at our staffing and how our 9th grade teachers are distributed. Some of them, I'm sure, would remain in the middle schools, but a lot of them would come up here. All of that would be a part of the planning, but from a curricular standpoint, the opportunities for kids, and when we talk to the middle schoolers about this, they say, I would have taken that class, but not at the expense of getting on a bus an hour earlier and extending my school day an hour and a half to drive to the high school, come back to the middle school, and so forth. Same thing with North Monco. So certainly we're up to that challenge. I've been a part of that process as a teacher and honestly as a student. So looking forward to it if we go that way and if the referendum is successful. But it would certainly, very few folks, school boards, community members, taxpayers, and voters have the opportunity to re-envision and impact the future of a school district like we do right now. We're at the precipice of a really important decision for the school district. I will quote Mr. Patchell when I came in this morning, or this evening, and he said, this is a huge night, and it is. These are big decisions being made, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime decision, and I believe personally that we should do it right.
Madam President, may I have a comment?
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Campbell.
Okay. In Dr. Bowers, you mentioned Mr. Bashel, and I'm thinking about other seniors or those folks who don't have any children and they may not be as invested in this idea of this new school building, which definitely is sorely needed. How do we drive home the fact that you, Dr. Bauer, said the one thing that everyone should remember is it'll end up costing I think you said $61 a year for 32 years, which sounds great. But Mr. Skoraki said the language couldn't be changed on the ballot. And the language that he quoted sounded very challenging and intimidating. So how do we make the public know or keep in the forefront of their minds that it really isn't that bad, even though the language on the ballot sounds real bad? It's only $161 a year per household for 32 years. How do we drive that home?
Yeah, great question, Dr. Lewis Campbell, and I will have to lean on Mr. Summers and Mr. Skoraki to a degree here. I do know that we cannot get as specific on the ballot question as at the tune of this much per year for the average taxpayer. It's really, what is the project and how much is it that is we are incurring in terms of electoral debt? That's what can go on the ballot question. But the responsibility goes on all of us. And as I've spoken to home and school associations and parents across the last few months, and honestly the last few years, because we've been talking about this renovation since 2017 formally, people are saying, how can I help? And that's where we're really going to have to deploy those who are interested in this project, knock on their neighbors' doors and educate them. And we will have to take the conversation to them. Go to places where maybe they don't have students in the school district, but yet they're still interested in what our students are doing and what the opportunities they do or don't have. So really imploring the community and all the parents that I've been speaking with, and I know others have as well, and Dr. Waters and Mr. Nicholson up here with me, they're saying, how can we help? Mr. Nicholson was at Oak Park the other evening, and they said, like, they're ready. How can we start passing out flyers? We are not there yet. We didn't even take a vote to design and have a project, and we certainly didn't pass a resolution about a referendum. But it will, Dr. Lewis Campbell, take all of us, administration, the board, parents, and friends of the school district to inform. And it's not necessarily about swaying, it is informing. And this is what you're voting for. This is what happens if it's yes. This is what happens if it's no. So I really want it to be a large turnout for the vote if we go down that path. And I want people to know what they're voting for and what they are or are not getting. That's the best way to do it. And I can't say it better than Mr. Skoraki when he said it is, what was the phrasing you used? The truest form of a democracy. And asking the community, yes or no? And here's the cost for that yes versus the no. So great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. I know Mrs. Wesley had one more question.
Thanks, President Stoll. It's not a question. It's a big thank you to Dr. Bauer and the personnel assembled there that made this presentation, and Schneider Group and our financial advisor. I've never been involved, obviously, in anything like this. I feel really informed. I feel really excited about this, and I believe that the depth of the presentation, whether it be from the educational side, the finance side, the tax side, the referendum, was all addressed in a very thoughtful, detailed manner, and I think it was amazing. So I'm really excited to take the next steps with this team, and I really, really am very happy about it all. I just wanted to express that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Wesley. And yes, I would like to echo Mrs. Wesley's comments. I'd like to thank the Schrader Group, Dave Schrader and his staff, Zach Willard and PFM Financing, and Dr. Bauer, Mr. Skoraki, and the whole administrative team for putting this all together. It was a lot of slides that go through, but I don't think we can be more transparent. It's all there for everybody to see. I encourage people to let other people know that this data and these slides were available online for future viewing. I'm looking forward to the community forum on April 13th. I marked it in my calendar. I'm excited to go out and talk to our neighbors about this. And I think, as Mrs. Ramich, I believe, said at the last meeting, that we have for facilities, shovels in the ground, the earliest that shovels in the ground would go would be 2025, right? So we have a lot of work to do in the meantime, but I'm looking forward to getting this project on the, finally getting going after COVID. And, we did really start talking about this in 2017. And COVID really put us behind the 8 ball, so I'm glad that we're finally moving along with this project. So thank you very much for all the information. I really appreciate it. And I guess with that, if there's no further comments from the board, we will open it up for public comment. Is there any other comments from the board? Okay. All right, Mr. Patchell, you look eager to make a comment, so.
Mrs. Stoll, I think we need to read the statement.
Okay, yeah, that's true. I'm sorry, it's late at night. Okay, audience and citizens guidelines. This meeting is being videotaped to community cable channels and streamed live. Individuals attending this meeting and intending to speak to the board should be aware that they are being videotaped. In order to meet the requirements of Pennsylvania's Sunshine Law, it is necessary to record the names of all citizens who speak to the board during the meeting. To ensure compliance with this requirement, it is essential that those planning to address the board state their name and municipality. Members of the audience are asked to limit their questions and comments to 3 minutes. As a reminder, the audience of citizens portion of the meeting is designed for residents and taxpayers of the district to provide comment and feedback on matters which may come before the board. It is not designed for debate or discussion with the board. When appropriate, individual school board directors may choose to respond to public comments that have been made once the audience of citizens period has concluded. Or they can request that a member of the administration follow up with the speakers after the meeting. And this is in reference to policy 903. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Patchell.
Oh, do you have a timer? Oh, surely we need a timer. 3 minutes would
there
be
you go,
sufficient for me to make my verbal complaints, but I will continue. Oh, here we go. First thing off the map is fiat accompli. Now, Mr. Summers, I'm sure you're firmly rooted into that Latin phrase used by legal. It's used by the high-speed rail, which is being built in the UK. It's so far behind, it's like, I can't even imagine. It's hundreds of millions of pounds behind schedule. And, the planners so in depth with all their suits and planning. Fiat accompli. Oh, is that like force de jour and imperanti colloqui? Stop with a mumbo jumbo. It's wrong. And what you're talking about here, 151,000, where do you dredge that number up? What, are they living in a cardboard box at White Rose Park? I live in Montgomery Township. It contributes 37% of your income. Okay? Well, if you can buy a house in Montgomery Township, which is rated number 58 by Zillow, they're pretty good with real estate. They don't sell them there. You know why? I keep it. I borrow money on it. I got 3% on it, and I'm going to have a heyday with it. And you know that loans are not income. I don't pay the EIT. My wife doesn't pay it either.
Mr. Patchell, please address the board and the administration, not the audience.
I'm sorry. I got carried away looking at these magnificently dressed suits. Okay? Okay. What we're going to talk about is the revenue. Your revenue is what? You know what? A national real estate, Zillow says this is the best place. I would like to thank, with special mention, Dr. Bauer in his 200 days on the job. You are doing a fantastic job, unlike the rest of the people I see here, crying and moaning about, oh, the building's 50 years old. You would have been great at the Pentagon. That was built down in 1932. Oh, they're still in that. I understand, even with a plane running into it. Okay? He has done outreach and a passion to create with the objective to make North Penn School District in a position at least in the top 10. We're 57 now. You're going downhill. And when these teachers have a contract, Mr. Devlin, 2%. Who in their right mind is going to settle for 2%? Delta Airlines, 10% every year for 3 years. I hope your ticket doesn't go up.
Mr.
Yeah, it's going to go up.
Mr. Patchell, please address the board.
Oh, excuse me. I got carried away again.
I can see that.
I'll try to obey as best as I can.
Well, your 3 minutes is up.
And you know what I'm going to do?
Your 3 minutes is up.
I can't hear you.
Your 3 minutes is up.
Oh, I am not. It's very loud. They did this at Carpenter's Hall during the 1776. They
Mr.
had very
Patchell,
heated discussions.
your
Now,
comment
I'm
time
telling
is
you
up.
what's going to happen.
No, your time is up, Mr. Patchell. Next up for public comment, please. Mr. Patchell, please cede the microphone for the next person.
Okay. I'll tell you what. You do what you want, but the plan you have is a death knell for everybody over 65.
Thank you, Mr. Patchell, for your comments this evening. Please cede the microphone. Thank you.
Hello.
Good morning, or good evening. Sorry.
My name is Karen Coley. I am a resident of Montgomery Township, and I have a senior and a graduate from North Penn. This school is falling apart all around our kids, and the space is not adequate for 2023 learning and beyond. I work in the corporate world, and our high school facilities design and layout is not supporting the next generation learning and what our kids will see in college and the work environment they will find after graduation. Option 2 is just putting lipstick on a pig. The students fear that we do not care about them. I recently drove high school boys to a basketball game at another high school, and I listened to what they say, and their comments in the back were, wow, our school district just doesn't seem to care about us like this school district seems to care about their students. Where is our community pride? I'm telling you, recently going through the college application process, colleges don't understand why we have 9th grade not in the high school, and they question this constantly. I want a community that cares about young people, that sets them up for success, that makes them feel cared for and that they matter, and provides them a positive learning environment that prepares the people who are going to take care of me as I age in this community and as I age in this world. We are way behind our neighbor communities, have already taken this action, and support their young kids financially. I will gladly support a new high school, and other parents like me feel the same way, even though I will not personally benefit from my children. We are angry that this wasn't done years ago, but we support the parents that come after us and their children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Hartranft.
Good evening, President Stoll. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good to see you. Benjamin Hartranft, 105 Bellows Way, Lansdale, Pennsylvania. First of all, I wanted to thank the North Penn School District for hosting the mall event we're doing on April 2nd. Thank you to Megan McGee. Shout out to her. I just wanted to say I'm very excited for the remodel of North Penn. One of my ideas is how can we bring inclusivity into the high school? By adding sensory rooms, by adding other stuff into the rooms. I think that's a way that we can dream big and be successful. And then what's going to happen when we turn 21, like after 21, you know? There's a problem with that. And, you know, with my fear is me and my brother, we love to do something like apartment complexes, like for us to like live independently. So, for example, we want to be able to be independent. And so some ideas we like to work on that as well. I think April is a great idea for Autism Awareness Month. I just wanted to let everybody know, make sure we keep supporting on that because I feel like autism is really it's not a disability, it's an acceptance, and it's also an awareness. It's a superhero power. And I'm very thankful for being part of this school, and I am so thankful for Dr. Bauer and the leadership. And thank you for having me come on the Home and School Board that night with talk with all the schools. I'm very excited to see what's going to happen, and thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for stopping in.
Okay, this is
Good evening.
intimidating. Good evening. My name is Amy Hawthorne. I live in Montgomery Township. I have 3 children currently in the district, one at the high school, one at the middle school level, and one at the elementary school level. I have been wanting this to happen. Especially I hear from my oldest what's going on here, and I am one of those families that has a child who starts his day at the high school and then goes to the middle school for a very long day. If you don't have one of those children, I think the ultimate point of all of this is that 9th graders in this district are in limbo. They're not really high school students, but they're also not really middle school students. And I think that is a huge disservice to our community. Stating my age, 30 years ago, when I was in high school, ninth grade was brought up to my high school in another state, but it has been super successful and they've never regretted that. I do think with technology, the way it is with our children and being a volunteer in the schools, I have seen where sixth graders do not belong in the elementary schools, in my opinion. In the very beginning with my oldest, I would say, no way. Keep them here, keep them innocent as long as you can. They're not, they know a lot. But I think before you can move them out, you have to address the ninth grade. So I do want to just say thank you to all of you, our administration, our school board, whether we agree politically or not. I think this is about the children. It's about our future. And I do think that North Penn is on the right page. And it would be awesome for our community to come together and to make this project happen sooner than later. So I just want to say thank you for that. And yeah, hopefully I can be more involved and hopefully rope more people in, because this is kind of sad. I would really like to see more parents come out to community conversations with Dr. Bauer, but also to our school board meetings. And I'll be the first to say this is the first school board meeting I've been to in a very long time, but I do plan to come to more. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Hawthorne. Thank you for coming out to tonight's meeting. And I would expect more people to be coming out into the future meetings now that this meeting has occurred, and interest grows in the project.
And the forum in particular over this issue.
But any help you can give in advertising it, that would be great. So, Mr. Lanier, go ahead.
Jason Lanier, Lansdale. The presentation was very informative. I appreciate that. There were some questions about those numbers that I'll jump into after. I wanted to make a quick comment about the rankings. I don't know what Mr. Fusco is talking about. You guys, in 2016, North Penn was ranked 11th. They're now ranked 47th in Pennsylvania. I don't think that there's much more dilapidation that's happened in those few years, which is causing the decline in those ratings. And I've pointed to what I think it is many times. I'll let that sit. Regarding the presentation this evening, just wanted to make sure I was understanding this right. The proposed tax increases that we would see, rather option 1 or option 2, do not include tax increases that might happen for other reasons, such as the traffic study or any other renovations that need to be done at the other buildings. So I think that's a fair point to say this isn't where it's going to stop, not at the whatever it was, $68 or whatever at $150,000 assessed house. Second question is regarding the temporary buildings that are needed for option 2, but not for option 1. I'm not clear as to why that is. Meaning if you're going to be renovating a building because the infrastructure needs work and you got to temporarily house kids, I understand that. But if you're renovating it and including a new center and all this new upgraded ways to learn, but you don't need to upgrade you don't need temporary housing or temporary classrooms, I'm not sure I understand that disconnect. Meaning it seems like $15 million is going to be spent on temporary classrooms regardless. So they might need some clarification there. And I guess lastly, and most importantly, is there any evidence that any of this new open spaces and the 21st century way of learning is beneficial to students? Because what I hear from educators in higher ed is that kids are coming in unprepared. And it's not just kids in North Penn, it's kids everywhere. So what is causing this sort of these lowering standards that a lot of four-year universities are finding themselves? A lot of remedial classes are being taught. And I'm not sure this 21st century open spaces and the additional $200 million is going to increase grades, which is really what this is all about. So that's what I'd like to see this addressed without getting in too much about option 1, option 2, option 3 is how is this going to be beneficial to kids other than to say something generic like the 21st century, this is what they do. In business, this is what they do. Because this isn't what education does all around the world.
Mr. Lanier.
They don't always have to be big, swanky buildings. Thank you.
Mr. Lanier, thank you for your comment. Dr. Bauer?
Sure, I think I can hit on all those briefly and certainly provide more detail following the meeting or later with Mr. Lanier or on April 13th. First, the modular construction or temporary construction. So if we were to move 9th grade to the campus, that building would be built first. So that would be the swing space in lieu of temporary modular construction. So I think Mr. Schrader said that the entirety of the addition would be somewhere about 200,000 square feet, roughly. So that addition would be used as the swing space. Whereas if we didn't move 9th grade, then we wouldn't have a swing space here on the campus, and we would need to bring in temporary construction for that purpose. So that was the first thing, or the second thing. The first thing that was mentioned by Mr. Lanier was the tax increase. He is correct. The debt that was discussed here and the impact on real estate taxes by PFM was reflective of this project alone. Historically, I am not voting for the board or making decisions in terms of tax increases, but historically, school districts do raise taxes each year because your operating expenses do increase each year. This is the impact of this project exclusively. And as we said, and I think Mr. Fusco reiterated, it is our recommendation that one of these two options happen. So tonight we highlighted the difference between the impact of those two options. And then lastly, in terms of 21st century learning and the flexibility, I would argue, Mr. Lanier said this is all about students' grades. It is about students' grades, but it's beyond that. It's about student well-being as well. And the studies in terms of natural light, fresh air, and flexibility and the creativity and problem solving and teamwork and the integration of multiple subjects that could be done in a space that is not, and I've used the phrase before, the 70s high schools were built like with a model of bells and cells, right? I mean, it was just, it's very institutional. And when you walk through this building in A pod and B pod and C pod and E pod, it feels institutional. And I hope Mr. Lanier will join us on April 3rd to go see the environment that these kids learn in. There is undoubtedly, and Mr. Scrocky said to me when we went to Falls Church, Virginia to look at their high school, as soon as we walked in the door, he was like, you cannot convince me that the difference for student learning isn't evident the moment you walk through. As soon as you walk in, it's a different environment. Our tiny hallways, our windows that don't open, there's a different environment. There's a difference in working environments, there's a difference in learning environments. So yes, I believe the academic outcomes, we'll make sure we outline that on April 13th, but there's a lot of other measurements as well: student attendance, student behavior, student well-being, and mental health. So certainly appreciate those questions, and we'll make sure we highlight those next month.
So two points I wanted to make to Mr. Lanier's comments. The way it was explained to me was that the 9th grade center would get built first. Then we would renovate A pod, put those students in the 9th grade center, take them back out when A pod is done, go to B pod, put them in the 9th grade center. When B pod is done, put them back, and so on and so forth, all the way around until the whole high school is renovated, and then the 9th graders come up at the end. Correct? So does that answer your question, Mr. Lanier? And then the second point about the taxes, I just want to make clear, like the project part is the referendum, the 9th grade. Mr. Lanier said something about other projects getting done. They would all be within the Act 1 index, as has been the case in the past. So when we raise taxes within the Act 1 index, that is including raising taxes for, our increased expenses, increased salaries, but that's also for the current projects that we've been working on. So it wouldn't be, if we did another project, like we wouldn't go to another referendum. It would all be within the Act 1 index, so. That's correct. The modeling thus far, in option 1, for example, with the referendum, include up to 100% of the Act 1 index in some years and short of that in others. But yes, all of our models accurate, Mr. Scrocky, all of the models that we've looked at, and as far out as 30 years from now have been within the Act 1 index. And your guess is as good as mine as what the Act 1 index will be. Mr. Scrocky emphasized that it was the administration's assumptions that were utilized in PFM's models, and the Act 1 index that we utilized was 2.7, I believe, because over the 16 years that Act 1 has existed, that's been the average. So it seemed to make sense to us to let's use 2.7 as the Act 1 index for the next 30-some years. Thank you. Yep. Are there any other public comments to be made this evening? Anyone else up on the board or administration would like to make a comment? No? Okay.
Just appreciate the time and consideration by everyone that's been put into this. Really, it's just one step of many in this community's journey, and appreciate the administration being able to frame this and to have this board be honest brokers of a dialogue in this community that's well-informed, that's open and transparent, so that when it's time to make a decision, the community will be informed and will be able to speak knowing that that good faith effort has been followed through by the administration, this board, and the district. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing how this unfolds.
Thank you, Mr. Casa. Okay. With that, if there's no further comments, Mr.
No, it's good.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Okay.
So
Thank
moved.
you very much. Thank you, everyone.